Thanks for tuning in to the Traumaplicity podcast with Dr. Amanda Helman, an author, cognitive release coach, consultant, and speaker. Dr. Amanda Helman has guests on the podcast who have overcome different areas of trauma and provided hope for the audience. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Traumaplicity podcast with your host, Dr. Amanda Helman. And on Traumaplicity podcast, we talk about traumas, which can be events or beliefs or even multiple events that happen in trauma. But not just that, we talk about how we can take simple steps. The brain loves simple and moving forward. And so this show is purposeful to have guests on and myself as well, talking about beliefs or ways to overcome your traumas or even anything holding you back to move forward. And so today we're in our series number 4, which is talking about different areas of health and well-being. And so I'm really delighted to have a guest, my guest on here today. So I'm going to share about her, and then you're going to hear all about it. So make sure you're tuning in. So for Irene Pace, there are a few things in this world that have more power over people than food. Even the strongest, most driven, most successful among us can crumble for a single cookie. Irene Pace is an author and business founder who started her career 20 years ago as a registered dietitian. In her time leading teams at hospitals, medical clinics, and in private practice, she saw it wasn't nutritional knowledge holding people back, but the challenges they had in their relationship with food. Her pioneering Greet Them Pull method helps people understand why food is challenging and frees them from the impact everyday stresses, big emotions, and trauma have on their food choices. Irene, it's so great to have you on here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for our chat.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. And so audience, if you're listening on my Facebook page, if you're listening on YouTube, or if you're listening on the audio podcast on Google and Amazon and any of those other channels, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and also let Irene know if you have any questions for her as we continue. All right. So my first question, Irene, is for you to share a specific area about how you overcame beliefs that allows you to serve others in the area of their relationship with food.
Well, the first belief that comes to mind when you ask that question was the belief I had as a registered dietitian that I was somehow immune to challenges with food, right? I'm a dietitian, so of course I can't be the one who would fall into any kind of trouble with food because I know all about this thing. So sure enough, I landed myself at a point in my life when I was dealing with a tremendous amount of personal challenge, stress on both personal and business side, and I found myself turning to food. And it was really that point where, there's one specific memory. I was driving home from a friend's house late at night in the car and found myself stopping 3 times to get donuts on one stop, a convenience store, ice cream bars on another stop, donuts again. And by the end of the drive, I was just a puddle of sobs and just this identity crisis mess. How can I be this person? So that realization that no matter what career we're in, no matter how quote unquote successful we are, we all have this human body that we're walking around on the planet with. And we are all then at the effect of whatever it is that might be influencing our choices, whether it's trauma, whether it's everyday stresses, whether it's feeling overwhelmed or that we don't have the skill set to manage a particular challenge in our life. We all can land in trouble with impulsive behaviors of some sort.
Thanks so much, Irene, for sharing your story and just being able to, right? I'm sure it's helped you to relate and say, oh my goodness, right? Like what is at the root of this? What are the beliefs, that led you there and also other people? And so speaking of that, what are some specific belief patterns that must shift when it comes to the area of food or even relationship with food?
Yeah, the first big one that seems to be a shift that frees people a little bit in the first part of this work is really leaning into and recognizing that the way we relate to food is an adaptive behavior. that it's born out of the most brilliant part of us that at some point in our history landed on food as a solution to solve something that we needed. And when we can really lean into that, this behavior that we right now wish away or hate or find is all kinds of problem or struggle for us actually came from that really brilliant part of us, we can start to shift. And instead of swimming in this shame and guilt and I'm broken, we can start to change to look at, hey, okay, there's some brilliant part of me that found food as a solution. And it's brilliant because food works. You know, you and I both know it does the thing we're asking it to in the moment. Like all of those impulsive behaviors sort of shift us for that moment. So they work. But then understanding that if I want to then adapt again to my life as it is now, I'm going to call on that same part of me to adapt. So if I'm spending all day making it bad or wrong or broken, then I'm essentially, coming down on the part of me that I'm actually calling on to make the change now. So that shift from broken to adaptive is one that's a belief that really has power to help people then make the changes they need to around food.
It's great. So I love how you shared about the brilliance part of your brain and how to really reframe that and even help people discover that in a different way. So that's great. And even how food is a solution when we are using it in different ways, so it is a solution in a healthy way. So thank you for that.
There's a second one, Amanda, that I think is an important one.
Oh,
Sorry
sure.
to jump
No,
in on
go
you
ahead.
there. This is another one that's kind of that shift point is right now when you have what I call the pull to food. So you feel this, you feel the food calling you from the fridge or the cupboards, or you find yourself sort of cruising in the kitchen. When you have that pull, right now, the pull or craving is something that most people find they wish they didn't have. So I don't want to crave foods. It's this thing you kind of dread or know is this entry point to struggle. And one of the another big shift in belief that really helps is when you can come to see that pull to food is like an invitation. So when you have that pull to food, it can be this invitation where you get to tune inwards, and there's something to discover about yourself there. Because with food changes and a lot of changes we try to make, some of the things that get in the way of the change is that we just forget to do it. We're trying to set reminders on our phone or put sticky notes up or something when we're in the early stage of change. And if you let this pull to food actually be your invitation into the change process, then suddenly you now have this really present onboard reminder that's going to show up as long as you're alive. You're going to feel that pull to food. And if you can pivot that enough, that the pull becomes your invitation to know yourself better, your invitation to explore, your invitation to practice whatever the thing you want to practice is, it can become this helpful onboard kind of navigation system that you have.
That's great. So I love that. I love that you're talking more about, what is the draw, what is the pull towards these foods or away from it, and even getting into a better relationship with yourself and seeing those things. So I appreciate your explanation of both of those beliefs. And so the next part is really looking at the relationship between trauma, negative experiences, and our relationship with food. And would be curious to hear what your perspective is about that.
Yeah. What I've come to know in this work, and after my, donuts in the car incident, I really took a turn down my own healing journey, along with really exploring what is it that's going on here. I mean, this clearly isn't knowing about nutrition, because if it was, I wouldn't be here. I've studied this and had been working in the field for over a decade at the time. So that deep dive really took me into the world of neuroscience, and really the world of trauma was a place that gave me lots of information about why it is we have these pulls come up. So what I came to know was when you have trauma that has impacted, or adverse experiences in your past that have impacted the way your nervous system is on a day-to-day basis, that you may be in this hypervigilant state or a protective state in your body where you really, maybe you're safe in the world around you objectively, but inside of you, something feels like it's not safe or needs to protect, then we end up in this. You might know it as sort of your listeners might know it as the fight or flight response, or something where you have this anxiety or things turning inside of you. That state can have us reaching out for food to eat as a way to try to shift our state or calm that spin from going on inside. I also came to know when we have shifts from one state to the next. So either we're coming from a state where we feel mostly kind of calm and grounded and regulated, and something turns on that protective mechanism, and we're sort of in that change between states. That's another place, that transition place where this pull to food arises. So if we can help people to start to understand the way their nervous system works and give them some identifiers to pinpoint where they are at any given moment with their nervous system state. Am I feeling really mobilized and protective? Am I feeling sort of shut down and hopeless and collapsed? And if I'm moving between those states, that food is coming up as a tool to help me. That's a really big piece of understanding the link, how food shows up in those places.
That's great. Yeah. So I do a lot with complex trauma and trauma work, but also just belief systems. And also when you talked about negative experiences as well and the neuroscience, that's exactly it. There's different things that may hold us back. And I appreciate that you brought up the different science of the body, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and how we respond, and how, that food may help with safety or comfort, because we're just needing something, as you said, to really help regulate our system, but can't find it. So appreciate that you brought that up, since it is such a huge area. So with your techniques and what you do, what are maybe highlighting 3 to 5 techniques or tips that you help people with in their relationship with food?
I can introduce your listeners to the Greet the Pull method, which is the 3-step sort of foundational tool that I've developed over the years, working with this link between nervous system and food. And so the first step is what the name of the tool is, which is Greet the Pull. So when we have this pull to food, oftentimes a pull to food or craving, or pull to really any behavior that you have this impulsivity towards, the first response we have is guilt and shame and wishing it away. And we can get in this downward sort of spiral that doesn't relieve the tension we're feeling. It actually adds to the tension that we're feeling in the moment. So what I've discovered is when you use a practice of greeting. So when I say greeting, it's like saying hello, like, hi, there you are. I see you. Okay, Paul. Okay, I want to eat the Oreos, or okay, I want to dive into the fridge right now. I see you. And what happens when you use a greeting versus a noting or naming, which can happen with some other more common practices we use around impulse control? Greeting activates that social engagement center part of our nervous system, the part that is relational instead of transactional. So when you add the greeting and you add a little wave or something that kind of adds some levity to it, you get this little shift in the way you approach the challenge from the very first step. So that's step 1, is greet the pull. Step 2 is to get curious. So as I'm sure you talk about with your work as well, curiosity is one of these states, right, that allows us to step away from judgment a little easier, step away from self-criticism a little easier. And when we get curious, one of the things we're doing is we get into a seeking behavior. And the pull to food is actually a seeking behavior, right? That feeling where you're trying to hunt or find the thing to eat. So we get to kind of shift away from the seeking behavior towards food. And now we're turning ourselves towards seeking answers or getting curious. And curiosity has us seek information, and then we get a reward for discovering things that helps take place of the reward we're seeking from eating the food. So with the curiosity, I invite, that's the place we do most of the work. So we greet to bring ourselves into awareness, drop into the moment, and then we get curious. And you can think of it almost like shifting a gear, right? Like, okay, I'm getting into curiosity mode. And I'll offer your audience a couple of questions to explore there. So I think about curiosity like having a curiosity container. Like you've just created this little space for yourself to do a little bit of discovery with this pull you have to food. So the first place you can explore is a question to ask yourself, what type of hunger is this? And I'll offer you 3 types of hunger to ask yourself the questions about. So the first type of hunger is stomach hunger. And stomach hunger is your need for nourishment. Your body has a need for sustenance or something, and so you're eating for that reason. The second type of hunger is what I call head hunger. And head hunger is born out of a thought or an idea. It's the kind of hunger that you look at the clock and it's noon and you're like, oh, it's noon, I should eat. Or it's a pairing of food. Well, when I have coffee, I always have a donut. So those things are coupled together. So it's born out of this thought, and it oftentimes has the word should with it. I should have something. The third type of hunger, as you may be able to guess, is that emotional hunger, which I call heart hunger. And this one has a particular kind of feeling to it too. As you play with these, you'll come to discern, oh, I know what stomach hunger feels like. It kind of feels like this in my body. I know what head hunger feels like. And then heart hunger kind of has its own tone to it. So it's I'm eating because I'm sad. I'm eating because I'm excited. I'm eating because I'm worried. This is your emotional hunger. So that first question of asking yourself about the type of hunger does a couple of really important things. It helps you to give a place to kind of tease apart what's going on in that moment of pull. Because sometimes it's more than one hunger at the same time. Like a common place to have this pull to food for a lot of people is in the evening time. End of the day, maybe the kids are all in bed and you're at home and suddenly you find yourself going to the fridge. Well, it might be stomach hunger because you've under-eaten all day long and haven't really fueled yourself well. And then it could be some head hunger because you have this habit of sitting down with food in front of Netflix every night, and the two are sort of linked together. And then it can be heart hunger because you're in the quiet of the night and, the first moment you've had in your day to pause, and all of the stuff there wells up and becomes really acute. So if you have these 3 lanes, you can start to address those things one at a time and start to kind of take the edge off of that pull. It feels a little bit less overwhelming and gives you some places that you can start to figure out really specific things to approach that. Anything to add to that? I feel like I'm talking here. I have the third step I can add, but I can see you nodding, and I'm like, oh, you probably have bits to add in as well.
That's okay. Well, I mean, so I like the first couple. Just to recap before you go into the third one, I really enjoy the greet the poll. I think it's great to really just almost acknowledge, if you will, you said awareness, and then really going into curiosity and just asking questions, right? Like what's going on? It's almost stopping your brain from doing what you normally do to just check in. And I love that you talked about the 3 different types of hunger, right? Am I doing that for boredom? Am I eating for, because I need fuel, or am I eating, just because there's something going on and I don't know how to take care of it? And I think those are 3 key things. And for the audience, if you have questions at this point, this might be a good time. Those are great, simple tips, right? And things to use. Love that. And so I was just nodding because I really appreciated that. So you can certainly continue with the third tip if I'm sure I'm curious as well as the audience.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned boredom. That Dr. Amanda was one of the big, like post-COVID, that was such a big pull to food for so many of us, that what do I do with myself and all of the things that are under that. So really kind of identifying what each of those pieces are that are there for you can be really helpful in you finding new solutions to that pull. So the third step in the Greet the Pull practice is giving permission. So this one scares people a little bit. I'm not going to lie at first. They're like, oh my gosh, do you know who you're giving permission to? Like, I'm the one who got myself in this trouble with food in the first place. If you hand me full reins, I'm likely to wind up 1,000 pounds in a moo on the sofa eating bonbons all day. Like the fear train just takes off. So this one takes some courage to explore, but the really interesting thing that happens when you truly, truly give yourself permission is that you move yourself from a place of feeling trapped, which you and I know that trapped feeling is part of that feeling of trauma, right? Or adverse experiences, that we activate the part of our nervous system that feels like we need to protect ourselves because we can't get out. So if you think of the dieting behaviors that are kind of commonplace in the diet industry, a lot of them have us feeling trapped. I have to follow some meal plan. I have to follow these rules. There's this specific thing, and there's negative consequences on the other side, whether it's the own criticism and guilt and shame you add on yourself, or if it's some coach you're accountable to or some group you're accountable to, there's a negative consequence if I don't do this thing. So there's this feeling of trapped. So what does giving permission really look like? So when you give permission, there's just like each of these steps, you want to be really intentional about it. So hello, I've greeted, I've done that. Okay, now I'm getting curious. You're like shifting the gear. And then now I'm giving permission. And permission comes from this understanding that, listen, I am a grown, I don't know if I can swear on here, but a grown ASS adult, right? I can choose if I want to eat the food, I can eat the food. I have full autonomy to make that choice. Sometimes with food, we're stuck in this older, I don't know if you talk about ISF or parts work, right? This older part of me that believes I actually don't have the choice or someone else is choosing for me. But really, when you step into your sovereignty of being able to choose, you can say, I can choose that thing, or I can choose not to have it. It's up to me. And then folks will often say to me, well, then I'm just going to choose the food every time. So now we move into how do we call on that wisest part of us that really is looking to move us in alignment with the kind of goals we have or our future selves. One of the ways to look at permission is if you think about it like you've just walked into the living room and your teenage child is lying on the sofa, okay, hanging out there. Or you imagine yourself as sort of a teenager or a young kid and you're hanging out on the sofa. If your wiser self comes in and says, okay, I'm going to assess this situation, and some days the right decision is for me to give you a little boot off the sofa and outside to play, right? Go on and do the thing, get up off the sofa and go. Other days, the right thing is for me to come over, grab the comforter and hand you the TV remote and say, tuck in. And, this is the right thing for the moment. So what we're actually wanting to do for long-term success with our eating is to be able to get attuned to the moment for ourselves and say, okay, I've greeted this. I see where I am. I've gotten curious. I know what's going on here. And now I want to tap into the wisest part of me and say, what is the kindest, most loving thing for me to do for myself right now? If I'm charged with the job of caring for myself, I want to get attuned to how do I do that? Because from moment to moment, if you're following some external plan, like let's say a meal plan that says, I always eat at this time, this food. Some of the time you're going to get that right. And you're going to match that food with the moment. And then some of the time you're going to follow that plan and you're going to get it wrong. And you're not going to be matching the moment because we as humans, of course, do this. It's changing all the time. So my goal with permission is, can I match? Can I match my response to what the moment is showing me? And sometimes I'm going to get it wrong, but over time, with permission, you'll learn to build out those skills of being able to read the moment really well and then experiment with different things to match it. And sometimes it's food. Sometimes you get to choose the food, and that's a tool you've known for a really long time, and that's okay. You don't want to pull the security blanket out of the hands of a little kid that you're trying to ask them to do a really hard thing. So you get to keep the food as one of your solutions in your toolbox while you build out the toolbox with other tools that you'll learn over time. So that's it. That's the 3 steps of the greeting the pull method.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that, Irene. And I love permission. I do a lot of that as well in different capacities, because it's permission to move forward, permission to, for your future, like you said, future self, or future, even now, giving yourself permission to be open to something and a change. And that's important for the body to know, and for us to actually move forward. And I love that you talked about, that specifically, and then going into, how would you do that, and even just a healthier relationship where sometimes things do change, right? There are ebb and flow, and that's us as humans, right? We're going to be human. We're going to make some different choices, but not to beat ourselves up really about it, but really just be okay with whatever that happened, and move forward. So thank you for sharing. So I'd love for you, I know you're an author, for you to share about your work. And obviously the audience can learn where that'll be or how to find you.
Yeah, thanks. So my first book came out in 2020, so it was a little bit of a dull roar release because it was in the midst of our pandemic lockdown. But that book is called Eat Like You Teach. And it is focused on, at the time, I was working with a lot of health professionals around their relationship with food. So there was this conflict, like the one I experienced myself, that is like, oh my gosh, I teach people how to look after themselves. And here I am finding myself stuck in the very places that I'm charged with helping others. So there's this identity conflict and some challenges around that. So that book, there's information for a broader audience in it as well, but it's really targeted at helping the helpers who find that their relationship with food is challenging. So that one you can get online, on Amazon, anywhere books are sold. And I'd love if you grab a copy and you have any kind of feedback. I always love hearing back from people who've listened and what nugget or read what nuggets they've taken away. And then more recently, I have a new book coming out, which is actually a guided journal that's called the Hello Pull Playbook. And this one is a tool to walk people through the steps of using the Greet the Pull method, and a place to capture those things. And until now, the only way people had been able to work with this method was to work with me directly, and I can only serve sort of a small number of folks. So I still take a really small group of people that I work with, specifically around food relationship. And then this journal is a way to access that tool and kind of walk yourself through the steps of it. So if you want to find me, I have an Instagram account at Greet the Pull, and I put up little tips and information, whether you're using the journal or working the method or just want to explore your relationship with food. There's information up there where you can connect with me if you want to reach out. It's a good place to find me.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing. That's great. Just your first book, and then also the tools that go with it to help people. And we'll certainly have Irene's Instagram and all of her information above the podcast and in the information. So please make sure you reach out and let her know how the book was, as she asked, and also to contact her if you really resonated with all she had to share. So Irene, we're coming to the close of our talk, and I really appreciated everything you've given us, all the insights and the wisdom and nuggets. And so what is one tip to encourage the audience in their journey moving forward with food and perhaps even just the relationship with food?
I think it's where we started, and really allowing yourself to lean into the idea that there's nothing bad or wrong or broken about you if you find yourself using food in ways that the world says are wrong. And the patterns of behavior that you learned to use food that way were born out of experience. And by giving yourself new experience, you can reshape and repattern those. So it's not hopeless. It's a matter of finding those right tools and those right supports, and then practicing from a place that says, I can do this because I've already done it. I've solved this problem, and the solution last time was food, and I can do it again with that same brilliant part of me and learn other ways with the life I have now, older, wiser, more autonomous, more resources, all of those things that I can learn and discover new ways to do this. So there's lots of hope in a place that I think a lot of times we can feel really hopeless. And I'm rooting for all of you in this as you go on the journey. So that's it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Irene. I love those words of encouragement. And so any of you listening, certainly continue to ask questions. And we are at the conclusion of the Traumaplicity podcast. Remember that it happens every Wednesday at 7 p.m. on the Dr. Amanda Helman author and speaker Facebook page, on the Traumaplicity YouTube channel. And we also have audio podcasts, Google and Amazon and iHeartRadio and all the likes. If you're listening and tuning in there, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, just to really add on and extend to what Irene said, that you are always loved, valuable, and worthy, no matter what, no matter where you are, at all times. It doesn't matter about your journey as much as you knowing on the journey that you're always loved. And so thanks again for tuning in. Thank you, Irene, for being an incredible guest. Audience, make sure you reach out to her. Other than that, have a great week. Take care, everybody. Bye.
The Traumaplicity podcast is sponsored by Cognitive Release Coaching TM and Dr. Amanda Helman, who empowers people to release the busy brain and gain back time, energy, and productivity that leads to well-being. Contact Dr. Amanda Helman by checking out one of the links to this show. Subscribe and share the Traumaplicity podcast with people that can benefit.